Okay, our next technique sample is the, they call it the binded seam, or some people call it a Hong Kong seam. And it's actually more common than you think. You might have this in your closet somewhere. This is a skirt turned inside out. And on the outside, it's just like a regular seam. But on the inside, to hide the raw edge, they finished the regular seam. They wrapped it with like fabric so that it would not fray. So this is a skirt that I found. This is like really an affordable pair of shorts by a surf company, and they have the binded seam at the waistband. H&M even does this, as well as like high-end brands too. So you'd be surprised, like sometimes kind of like boring on the outside, then when you look on the inside, you're like, oh. And a lot of people like to use like a contrast fabric as well. This is like kind of like a contrast or some sort of like flower print on it. Or you can use the same exact fabric as well. So take a look through your closet, see if you can find a couple examples of this type of application, the binded seam. So to do it, you can buy bias tape. They take bias tape and they wrap that around the raw edge of the seam allowance, or you can also make your own. In order to make your own, you do need to cut your bias tape on the bias line of your fabric. So if you have fabric, you really want to know where is your grain line. It's nice here. I have my selvage here. So when you have, let's zoom in so you can kind of see. See, there's the selvage on the end. So I know right away my straight grain is parallel to that. So my bias line is going to be 45 degrees. It's kind of neat if you have a triangle ruler, because then you can just line up the edge of where your grain line is, and it's a perfect 45-degree angle. If you don't have that, these regular rulers are great too. I love the clear ones, and with these boxes, so I'll line up, my grain line in one of these boxes. Let's see if I have like a pointer, like see where it says like number 3, and I kind of turn it, because I know these are perfect squares, and I have the edge of like my grain line going up and down, kind of cutting through those boxes perfectly. That aligns my ruler to be at a perfect 45-degree angle. Not 40, not 35, 45 degrees, which is great. So you really only need to do that one time, and then get some chalk to mark it. For movie magic, I am using a Sharpie, but normally I would just use chalk. And then you could decide how wide do you want your bias tape to be as well. And then go ahead and cut the strips out that width. Okay, so I'm gonna use bias tape that's 1.5 inches wide. And then there's different ways to fold your bias tape. Again, you can buy bias tape already folded and made, cut on the bias for you. You're just limited to colors and fabric, but you can always make your own out of your own fabric. So you would cut it however wide you need it, and then you would fold it. And it's really nice to use like one of these gizmos to fold it. They come in all kinds of different sizes. So just depending how wide you want your tape. Today I'm doing 1.5 inches, so this red one, how I know that's the right size is because I measured it, and the opening's 3/4. And it's gonna fold twice, so 3/4 plus 3/4 is 1/2 inch. Here's like smaller ones, a wider one, so you do have choices. I also have this amazing folder too. I love this because I put it on my sewing machine, and then my sewing machine actually folds my bias tape as it's sewing. I love it. It's great for the jukies. And then here it even says how wide it is, 1.5. So I don't even have to measure it. I love that. So I have a couple of different sizes of these for our juki sewing machines. I don't know if you can buy this for home machines. I personally haven't seen it on the market, but you might be able to find it. There is this little guy for home sewing machines where you put in your bias tape. It's supposed to hold it in for you. There's this little knob, so you can change how wide your bias tape is, but you would use this after it's folded. So you would still need one of these to fold it first, and then you would use this presser foot to feed it through on a home sewing machine. I think it's really handy once you have your bias tape in there, but it can be a little tricky to kind of get the first couple stitches going. Okay, so I'm gonna cut my bias tape 1.5 inches. My ruler is 2 inches wide, so it's less than that. So I'll go like this. All right, if I line it up with this ruler, this line here, that is 1.5 inches. Okay, and you can just cut a whole bunch. Once you have that one 45-degree line, it's kind of easy to keep going and make a whole bunch just depending how much you need. You can also sew them together to make one really long strip, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out. Okay, so let's say we want to make this extra long. We want to connect these two seams right here. The way you do it is I like to kind of line it up like this. Now the problem is I can't sew the raw edges to the raw edges, right? We need some seam allowance. So I'm going to flip. I always like to place it like this first. Then I flip one over face down, and this is the line I'm going to sew. Now it is important where you sew it though. So I'm gonna scoot it over a little bit. I'm not lining it perfect like this because I can't sew the very edge, but if I scoot it over, you can kind of see through the fabric, like see where it meets right here. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, here and here, this is 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, right? But then anywhere underneath where there's 2 layers of fabric, this is not 2 layers of fabric anymore when you get a little lower. So, but if I kind of scooch it over a little bit, the 2 layers of fabric meet right here. And that means straight across, that will be 1.5 inches. So that is actually where you want to sew. And then after you sew it, let me stick a pin in there just so you can kind of get the idea. Pretend that is sewn together. Then when you unfold it, the edges should line up to where the bias tape is nice and straight and there's no like weird corners, okay? So actually it would have been sewn right here. I probably pinned it wrong. There you go. Sew it all the way, and then when it opens, it unfolds and the line just kind of keeps going. And this is just seam allowance that you can cut off or fold under or whatever. So that's kind of the trick, is knowing how to line it up, right? You wouldn't just line it up where the raw edges are even. You do line up where the raw edges are even, but you have to scooch it over a little bit. So you see, like, I don't know how to explain it. Hopefully this visual is helpful. This is not gonna work. This will work if you sew. You want to make sure you're always sewing 2 layers. If I were to line up right here and sew this brown line, this is only 1 layer until it gets right here, and then we have 2 layers, and then you're sewing 1 layer again. You know what I mean? You don't want to sew 1 layer at all. You want to have it scooched over so you're sewing 2 layers the entire time. That's how you can connect bias tape. Okay. So once you have your bias tape ready to go, you can put it through one of these folders, take it over to the iron, and just kind of slide this in and use a pin to kind of pull it through. There you go. And then you can see it's folding it for you. So it's really good to do this right at the ironing board, because then you can iron it as you pull it out. It makes it pretty easy, right, to have it folded. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this to the iron and do that. I think we're good. That looks pretty good. And then you would just fold it over one more time. Now here's my little trick when I fold it over one more time, is I don't like to fold it perfectly in half. Instead, I like to fold it so that the bottom is a little bit longer. That way when I go sew it to the top layer, if I'm ever off at all, I'll for sure catch the bottom. Sometimes if you fold it perfectly like this, I don't know, it can wiggle and you won't catch the bottom. So it's just a nice trick to kind of fold it to where the bottom's just a little bit wider. Another really cool thing about bias tape is that if you need to sew it around a curve, you'll notice this is so flexible. Look how it's turning into a curve, and there's no puckers or anything. That's only happening because we cut it on the bias. I'm just cutting all those like diagonal threads. You know, we cut it off of the cross grain, the warp and the weft, you know, that was holding it together. So it just has more room to really be free and change shapes. You can add steam and you can really turn it either way. You know, here I'm turning it kind of in. A second ago it was going out, and there's just no puckers. It's much more flexible. So if you need bias tape around like a Peter Pan collar or anything, you know, just make sure it's definitely cut on the 45-degree angle, and you shouldn't have any puckers. It's really easy to work with. Okay, for the Hong Kong technique sample, the binding sample, you will need bias tape. So again, you can make your own, or you can buy some that's store-bought. And then you'll also need your swatch of fabric as well. And this is a seam, so you wanna make sure you cut your swatch, so you have 2 of them. Okay, and you know, it's up to you. You can sew the plain seam first, press open your seam allowances, and then add the bias tape, or you can add the bias tape first. I think I'll add the bias tape first in this case. So just cut off however much you think you need. I think this will be more than enough for me. And you're gonna stick your fabric inside your bias tape and have it fold over, pin it, and then you're gonna edge stitch it. Okay, so let's get my pins. Through all those thicknesses. Okay, and again, I'm gonna go ahead, edge stitch it really close to that fold. This is a special foot some people do like to use. You can kind of see how you're supposed to kind of get the bias tape in there, and then it's supposed to go underneath, there we go, the presser foot, like this. And just kind of helps you sew straight. You would then also turn this thing, this little dial right now, it's really big. And it fits, but I'm actually not going to use this. I don't think a lot of you guys have that. I'm just going to take it to the machine and try to edge stitch it. Just do a good job pinning. This can kind of help you skip pinning is what it's supposed to do. But okay, here I go. So what presser foot should I use? You could definitely use your basic one. I have this like zipper foot one, edge one in here. I think I might use that because I think it might help me sew straighter. I'll line up the fold right next to the edge, and then that way the stitch will be right next to it. Use a foot, you just want to use a foot that you can line up the edge of the fold somewhere and help you sew straight. So you have some options of what presser foot is best. I wonder if I'll change the angle, hold on. Okay. I'm going to backstitch. Oops. Oh, it got off a little bit, darn it. If you're getting off, put your needle down and lift up the presser foot. Okay, and backstitch. Okay, pull it out. Okay, so I missed it a little bit. This is the problem of the bias tape where it can be kind of tricky. In my defense, I have a camera in front of me, so it is kind of hard to see, but this happens to students all the time, so I did want to show you. This is very common, so just take it out and do it again and get some more practice until you can get it straight in. With that said, there is an amazing presser foot that makes this so easy and so hard to sew crooked, and I'm going to show you that next. Okay, here is that crazy folder that I was talking about. So on this machine, it has these little holes right here. And I just line it up. So you do leave your regular presser foot on. It could be any presser foot. Could be the general one. And I'm gonna use this screw. There are 2 of them so that it doesn't like get crooked. Do a little righty-tighty. There we go. But yeah, 2 of them kind of makes sure that it doesn't tilt, you know. But if you only have 1, just make sure it's extra tight. And see how it kind of can go left or right? Just get it so that it's lined up to your foot. Great, make it as tight as possible so it doesn't move around. I think I'll be okay with just 1 screw today. Then you can take your bias tape that you have not ironed yet. That's also what's so great about this. And just go ahead and stick that in. Okay, this is the wrong side facing up, the back side's the other way. It has an opening here so I can get a pin to help me feed it through. There it goes. Make sure I feed it all the way through. Okay, so I'm going to use this screw and loosen it, and I'm just going to actually this time get it right next to my regular presser foot. So put this down so you can see it's lined up right next to it. Get my thread underneath the foot, pull towards the back. This guy's tight. Okay, feed in the bias tape. Use a pin to slide it through. Lift up the presser foot. There it goes. And see how it's folded? Pull that out, just make sure it's full. Sometimes I go back and forth just to make sure it's really actually in there. Okay, I'll pull it out so it's underneath the foot. Okay, let's get your piece of fabric and just line up your fabric on that table. And you really want to sandwich it between the top fold and the bottom fold. Ooh, I'm kind of worried about how that's folded. I'm going to play around with this real quick. Okay. Oh, we'll see how this goes. Okay. Okay. So, back stitch. There you go. Move that thread. So you can see it's sewing it. Now, if I want to get this closer, I should move this to the side a little, so I'll go ahead and try that. Okay. And then back stitching. Okay, and that's it. So you can see, I'll get a little bit closer there. But anyways, this is a much easier, foolproof way to sew binding on your fabric. Back stitch. And back stitch. Voila, beautiful, folded and sewn at the same time, perfectly straight. I love it. And the last step of the Hong Kong binded seam is to put your right sides together and sew the seam with whatever your seam allowance is. It really depends on the pattern that you're making. You definitely want it to be wider than your binding, your bias tape strips. So I guess in this case, I'll shoot for a 5/8 inch seam allowance for this technique sample. Okay, and I'll start at the top, I'll back stitch and sew straight down, back stitch, and then I'll take it to the iron and press my seam open. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and seam them together. Back stitch. End and back stitch. Press your foot up, pull towards the back. And let's open it up. So on this side, It's just a regular seam like any plain seam. But then this side, we open up our seam allowance, it's finished so that the raw edges can't fray. So now I'll just take it to the iron and finish it off. There we go. Voila. Regular seam on this side. No raw edges showing on this side because it's clean finish with the bias tape binding. Hong Kong method or binded seam method.